Hey guys, and welcome to the Week 7 edition of the Fantasy Points XFL Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Tribbey, and I've got Chris Wecht here by my side to help us break down every angle of the Week 7 XFL slate. Chris, how are you doing today, and how did your Week 6 go?
I'm doing good. Week 6 didn't look great early on. Lance Lenore getting hurt early was not fun. That was a nice zero in a lot of my lineups. Lucky Jackson's performance did pull me to a slight profit, but nothing, never was really in shot of taking any big tournaments down.
Yeah, I had an okay week. I was looking pretty good on main slate and did pretty well on the early showdowns. I was winning like, I don't know, 4 or 5K at the half of the fourth game, and I was like, okay, things are looking okay. And I didn't end up on like any Lucky Jackson at all. So his huge performance really killed me. And I just ate it on the final showdown. So ended up like roughly break even on the week. Not my best. Had a chance at some decent money, but kind of needed everyone in that fourth game to settle down. That just didn't happen. But that's in the past, and I think people want to hear about these upcoming games. The slate kicks off tonight, guys, in less than 5 hours. Our first game is the Seattle Sea Dragons at the Arlington Renegades. 7 p.m. kickoff tonight. Like I said, the total here is 37.5. Seattle's favored by 5 points. Chris, before we get into injuries and the fantasy side of things, any bets you like?
Seattle favored at only 5 points. Has Arlington scored more than double digits in like a few weeks even? I don't even remember.
Arlington is averaging 13 points per game, which is actually the lowest in the league, worse than San Antonio, worse than Orlando. They have not scored more than 14 points since week 1. So yeah. There you go.
This feels like a Seattle smash spot. Maybe Arlington's defense is not terrible. Their offense is just so bad though. And I don't think Seattle's defense is terrible. So even if Seattle's offensive output isn't sky high, they could easily win this game, 24-10 or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way. I've made 3 bets so far this week, and 2 of them are on this game. I got Seattle -4.5. I think some books are still hanging 4.5. So definitely shop around for that. And then I also took the under 37.5 here. I mean, I just don't see a ton of scoring in this game. The one thing that worries me about Seattle -4.5 is that they play like the Minnesota Vikings, where they just want every game to be within 1 score no matter what. So, Ben DiNucci might try his best to make this interesting, but I mean, Seattle is just a way better team. Moving on to injuries here. Things are pretty clean on the Seattle side. Morgan Ellison has been limited in practice, and he looks pretty likely to suit up. XFL reporter Mike Mitchell, who does a really great job, highly recommend following him. He said last week that Ellison wanted to play and the team held him out. I mean, this injury is clearly hurting his efficiency, and I'm hoping with a week of rest. I mean, his last game was over 2 weeks ago, right? Because they played on Thursday. So hopefully he's healthy, and we'll get to his fantasy value, assuming he's active. It is worth noting, though, that he's listed as the RB2 after Darius Bradwell on the team's depth chart. It was also a little interesting that they didn't list TJ Hammonds as the RB3. They only listed him as a wide receiver. So maybe they don't really anticipate playing Hammonds much at running back. On Arlington, things are pretty clean from an injury perspective, but they did just cut Kyle Sloter and trade for Luis Perez. So Perez, I think, we can immediately assume is the best quarterback on the team. The rumor is, though, that Perez will not be active this week, leaving Drew Plitt to start and Kevin Anderson as the backup. Starting with the Seattle side of things, we know Ben DiNucci can run. We know Seattle's fairly pass heavy. My question is, he's pretty expensive. He's not projecting as, an elite value. How are you playing the Seattle quarterback situation, and what receivers are you looking at here? And then I'll give my thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is probably the first week that DiNucci is not the highest overall projected quarterback of the slate. I mean, it's just the nature of the game script that we're expecting. They, for the first time really this season, they cut their like neutral situation pass rate down to 50%. Their early down rate was at 50% last week. I do wonder, like you said earlier, with them playing in a lot of close games, because DiNucci's been pretty loose with the football in terms of throwing picks and whatnot. So I wonder if they are in games where they feel like they don't need to score 30 plus points, kind of like what they may have thought against Orlando last week, that they get a little bit more run heavy. And I think the industry is kind of on that too. I don't think he's popping in projections in general. So
yeah,
it's going to keep his ownership down, which makes him a fine play. If he was going to be chalky, I probably wouldn't be playing him this week, but I think he's a fine play. He's kind of like how we view AJ McCarron most weeks, except this week it's DiNucci.
yeah, I'm with you there. I think I like him. I mean, I'm kind of assuming something around 20%. I was saying in Discord earlier, I think quarterback ownership is going to be pretty flat. No one really stands out. So DiNucci around 20%, I think is pretty nice. And to me, the stacks are pretty straightforward. I mean, you want one of Jacques, Pearson, or Blake Jackson, and then you just mix in one of these super cheap outside wide receivers. That discussion on the outside wide receivers, I think, is pretty important because, last week the industry drifted towards Damian Willis. I mean, he was like 18% owned in the $15, and Juwan Green and Jordan Vesey were just total afterthoughts. And those were the guys who ended up running the most routes. I think Green was at 80%, Jordan Vesey at a season high 75%. Those are the guys that I'm the most interested in, but I do think, Damian Willis is certainly still in play there at only 3,700. Do you have any leans on these Seattle wide receivers?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. If you're playing DiNucci, you want one of Pearson or Blake Jackson, and then either VZ or Green. Willis seems like he's pretty much capped at 50% of the routes. It just doesn't seem like that number is getting up, but he could, he doesn't need to run all of them. So he could catch a touchdown at 3,700 and still pay off. Josh Gordon's the only one you just don't play. Josh Gordon.
Yeah, Gordon kind of in the doghouse right now. I mean, he'll probably still get some looks in the red zone and like a 50% route share, but you just can't. I mean, you can't pay that salary for those underlying metrics. I do think Juwan Green, after what he did last week, ends up being the highest owned of that sort of cheap trio. And that sort of makes my favorite Jordan Vesey. VC has led the XFL over the last 2 weeks with 5 red zone targets. I mean, with Gordon kind of in the doghouse, DiNucci just it seems like the red zone offense is kind of just throwing up these lobs to their bigger outside guys. And, I think going into the season, we all thought that would be a lot of Josh Gordon. And as the season has gone on, it's been a bit more Jordan Vesey. So 4,400, I think he has really strong TD equity and makes a lot of sense in your DiNucci double stacks. The running back conversation for Seattle, I think, is super interesting because, again, like I said, Darius Bradwell listed as the starter, but I think we know who the best player is, and I think we know that the team knows who the best player is, and that's Morgan Ellison. The problem is, of course, Ellison's efficiency really fell off after his injury, but Ellison, I mean, even at 80%, 85% of his normal efficiency is still drastically better than Darius Bradwell. So I think, if Ellison is inactive here, that makes me like the passing game a bit more because I just don't think this team has any faith in Bradwell. I mean, they've given him a few carries inside the 10 and the results have been bad. And he's averaging 2.2 yards per carry. So there just really isn't much to get excited about. If Ellison is active, though, I mean, he's going to be like 5% owned. No one's going to want to touch him. It's really hard to project him well. I mean, we're assuming he's active and we're kind of projecting a split. It's very possible, though, that he just dominates backfield usage and earns 70% of backfield weighted opportunity. Sorry, I just saw Neil Orfield in the chat. Neil, happy to have you here. I will not be supporting the Brahmas. I'm a Houston Roughnecks fan, but just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, no, I think this running back spot is super interesting because if Ellison is active, I mean, there's a chance that he spells Bradwell and just doesn't play a ton. And then there's also the chance that he has, 15 carries, a couple targets, gets a ton of red zone work in a blowout victory. I mean, that sounds really appealing in tournaments. I'm not sure what your thoughts are here, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, Ellison seems like an awesome leverage play. I'm hoping people buy into the depth chart narrative, which we've just seen proven wrong time and again so far this season, that you can't read too much into these depth charts, especially when we know the player that's listed as the backup is the more talented player on the team. So I don't know if I'll go crazy with Ellison, but I'm definitely going to have him sprinkled through my lineups just because he's going to be so cheap. You can't get a better game script than this. He's going to be so low owned. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but I think you can make it work this week.
Yeah, 7K is kind of a tricky price range. I think if he was, closer to 5, he'd probably be pretty popular. But I mean, I'd be shocked if he cracked. I mean, above 5% would be pretty surprising to me, given the situation. I mean, in XFL, people are just really scared of the injury tags because you do not want to be taking zeros. So definitely a good leverage spot there. Moving on to the Arlington side of things, I think we can go pretty quick here. Quarterback isn't exciting by any means. I
Yeah,
mean,
you
Drew
don't play these
Plitt,
quarterbacks.
yeah, Drew Plitt doesn't look good. I know, it kind of makes sense to be excited about Kevin Anderson in the sense that we haven't seen him and maybe he could be good, but he was, he's QB3 behind Plitt and Sloter. Um, yeah. Do you have any leans here? I think you're probably only talking about these guys in relation to the Showdown slate.
Yeah, I mean, the team didn't trade for Luis Perez to then see what a guy like Kevin Anderson can do. Like
Yeah.
they must kind of already know what they have in him. This just feels like they're just trying to get through this week to figure out, get Perez ready for the next week. So Plitt probably gets almost all the work, but we could see Kevin Anderson at some point, I guess.
Yeah, Plitt's look pretty rough. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if he got benched early, but I also wouldn't expect much out of Kevin Anderson. I mean, we might have a situation where they just like every couple drives, like we see a new guy and they just keep not doing well. For Showdown, I think you probably want to limit to max one of these guys per lineup in the hopes that they just get like at least 75% of the
Right.
work. I don't really think it makes sense to play both quarterbacks. I mean, maybe both in the flex. I don't know. It's pretty thin. I really hate Showdown for these iffy quarterback scenarios. Um, Wide receiver for Arlington is at least a little interesting. I mean, we know we have Sal Cannella, who's really their only consistent guy in terms of route share. He's running all the routes and pretty easily leading the team in targets. After him, though, I mean, it's pretty tricky. I wrote up Rennell Hall in quick hits just as a guy who, I think looks pretty good. I mean, they call him Speedy Hall. Like, I think he has some decent big play ability. Victor Bolden would also be in the discussion for, a guy who could rip off a big play. Victor Bolden's route share last week was only 20%. Hall actually tied for the lead among receivers, I believe, with a 52% route share. He's only 3,000 and he's got the IR tag next to his name, which I think he's going to be like 1%, sub 1% on the 4-game slate. And I'm not super interested in him there. For Showdown though, I mean, I don't think people are going to click him because he still has that IR tag next to his name. He's active. Like he's gonna play. I don't know why DraftKings hasn't removed that tag, but it's definitely going to keep his ownership super low for Showdown. So that's really my only angle that I have on these Arlington wide receivers. Chris, do you have anything you want to say here? It is pretty gross.
Yeah, these are only Showdown plays. I don't think
Yeah.
any of these guys will be on the full game slate. Tyler Vaughn's is probably playing this week too, so that could make things a little
Yeah.
messy for these other guys as well. Just yeah, I don't have a hard lean in Showdown other than yeah, a guy like Hall or Bolden would probably be my two favorites just because they have some big play ability. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Running back for Arlington, actually a little interesting. Past 6 weeks, pretty much, or 5 weeks, Damien Smith was just dominating backfield usage, and there wasn't really a reason to talk about anyone else. Week 6, though, was a different story. We saw Letty Brown in his first game of the season earn a 49% snap share, tied Damien Smith with a 42% route share, and he had about 40% of backfield weighted opportunity. It looks like they actually like this guy. I mean, they gave him a couple red zone rushes. The snap and route share splits were pretty much even with Davion Smith, and he's only 3,000. I mean,
Mhm.
it's really hard not to consider him one of the top values at running back, especially because running back in these spring leagues is often so thin, and the guys that we know are bell cows are for the most part priced up. I mean, we'll talk about Jacques Patrick a little bit later. But yeah, I think if you need to save salary at running back, Letty Brown makes a lot of sense. The only the only disclaimer I'd throw on there is that Arlington might be so bad offensively that he just like can't do anything. So like every time I've ended up with an Arlington Renegade in a lineup and I watch these games, I'm just like pulling my hair out. So yeah, I'm curious on your take here, but I do think I'm going to play a decent bit of Letty Brown in the spots where I need to save some salary.
Yeah, this kills Damien Smith. You basically can't play him at all, whether it's Showdown or the full game slate. Letty
Yeah.
Brown becomes viable, but you basically, if you're playing him on the full game slate, you basically need to hope one, there's no other running back that goes off. Everyone's got to be kind of middling, or to offset that, a bunch of higher end wide receivers go off, because that's
Yeah.
really the situation where you're getting Letty Brown in your lineup. So he's fine if you do need the running back salary. We've not seen we've seen one really big blow up running back game so far this entire season from Abram Smith. So yeah, he could totally be the RB you need at 3K if the things break right.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I do disagree a bit though. I think Davion Smith's still in play for Showdown. I mean, his TD equity is still
Yeah.
solid. I mean, yeah, the Letty Brown stuff is concerning, but if I had to bet, Davion Smith is getting most of these goal line carries. So I am fine with him on Showdown, even though he's overpriced relative to how we have him projected. Chris, anything else on this game before we move on?
Nope, that's it.
Sweet. All right. Our next game, this is a Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff. Neil Orfield's San Antonio Brahmas at the Vegas Vipers. Total here is 39.5. Vegas is favored by 3 points. Chris, before I get into injuries, of which there are many, do you like any bets here?
Yeah, the under looks pretty good to me as well in this one. I mean, San Antonio is right alongside Arlington on just not being able to score points, really. And Vegas is not right as what we know right now. They are starting not Brent Hundley. I'm just totally blanked on the other guy's name.
Jalen McLendon
Yes.
is his name. You could just say not Brent Hundley, and that would probably be enough.
Yes. So who I think you told me earlier this week has like 140 career college pass attempts. So
yeah, we'll talk about him here in a minute, but not super optimistic for offense in this game. Like I said, I took 2 bets on the first game. My third bet of the week is the under in this game. I actually got 39. I'm in Georgia, so I'm limited to offshores. I think a lot of the US sports books are hanging 39.5. So I mean, I have a really hard time not loving that under, given like just how iffy this quarterback situation is. But before we get into these very exciting quarterbacks, let me go over injuries. This is probably our most injury intensive game of the week. Jack Cohn is questionable with an ankle injury. Definitely something to monitor. I mean, he might play, like he might start if he's active. I'm really not sure. I don't know if the team's like totally done with him yet. I mean, Chris, do you have a lean? Like if Cohn's active and they don't make an announcement as to the starting quarterback, how would you want to project this?
I think they have to try and roll with Benkert and just
Yeah.
see what happens. I mean, they could go back to Cone. I don't. We've seen coaches do weird things, but
Yeah.
if I was the team, I don't know how you go back to Cone. I just don't know what you're hoping for.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think I mean, Juwan Pass looked really bad. So I think, if he is active, they definitely want him to be the backup quarterback over Pass. I am with you though. I think it makes more sense for them to start Benkert. We can talk about that more in a minute here. Travis Tavonen dealing with a head injury. He's probable, likely to play. On the Vegas side of things, DeAndre Torrey is out. Geronimo Allison is questionable with a back injury after being limited in practice all week. Sing-Q Sweeting is questionable after being limited all week with an ankle issue. I would expect both Allison and Sweeting to suit up. I think they've been dealing with those injuries for a while. Martavis Bryant came down with an illness. He actually missed Thursday's practice due to that. I would consider him like pretty questionable. Hopefully he can feel better and suit up, but would not be surprised if he was inactive. Makes it pretty tough to project these Vegas wide receivers right now. All right. So the San Antonio side of things, I mean, we already touched on this quarterback situation. We have Benkert projected as the starter. He's the minimum price on DraftKings. So if you assume he gets 100% of the work, I mean, I think he makes a lot of sense. This is a guy who spent time in the NFL with Green Bay and San Francisco. I mean, he looked awful in his debut, but he had joined the team 3 days prior. And it seemed like most of his misses were due to miscommunication. I mean, his interception was just really bad. But when you haven't played in a game in like 3 years or something like that, like, I'm definitely willing to give him a pass on just the really bad performance. Chris, how are you playing Benkert this week? Because it feels like, just given his salary, you need some exposure here, right?
There's not a lot of awesome QB plays, so maybe he could work in the full game slate, but I'm leaning towards no. I'm fine with, I think Showdown, he makes a lot of sense, but I don't think there's a lot of guys that you really want to pay up for this week. So saving all that money at QB, I don't think is something that I'm going to be trying to do.
Yeah, one of my like macro thoughts for this slate is given like how the industry and how we are projecting these like higher end wide receivers, none of them are really popping. At the same time, though, I think just based on the way these slates have gone historically, you really want to work in as many of these high priced wide receivers as you can. I imagine, having like two of Ja'Cory Pearson and Hakeem Butler, Deontay Burnett, like these really expensive guys, trying to work in as many of them as you can, probably goes a little underutilized, which makes me like guys like, Benkert or Letty Brown a little more. Because I think people will end up on more balanced builds this week. I mean, there's a good amount of value at wide receiver. So that was kind of one of the macro thoughts I have. Yeah, I'm going to play a little bit of Benkert on the 4-game slate. I'm not like super excited about it, but I mean, at the same time, like I would not be surprised if, he is the answer to their quarterback issues. And, at his salary, if he manages 15 DraftKings points, you're in a good spot. I mean, Quinn Dormady didn't throw a touchdown last week, and he was one of the top values at quarterback. Yep. So I'm fine with Benkert. There is a Saturday 2-game slate with 10K to first. I think he's pretty tempting there. San Antonio wide receivers, it feels like we've kind of gotten some clarity here. I mean, TJ Vasher, Fred Brown, and Landon Akers kind of dominated route shares last week, and we know Alizé Mack is their top tight end. Chris, do you like any of these guys?
I think you could take shots on Vasher or Brown. Akers is just too expensive still. His price 8,400 is just way too high when Vasher and Brown are both 3,400 a piece. So yeah, you could take shots with either of them. Mac is also fine, but I'd probably lean Vasher or Brown.
Yeah, so Vasher led all week 6 wide receivers in target share, finished second in air yards, but just had one catch for 22 yards. Big part of that was because, Jawan Pass just like actually can't throw a spiral, and Benkert, I'm sorry, Jawan, and Benkert, a lot of miscommunication there. So I think, with Benkert getting the offense down, Vasher has like a lot of juice as the wide receiver 1 here at only 3,400. Kind of reminds me of Lance Lenoir last week. Obviously, the Lenoir play did not work out, but I think the process there was definitely correct. So I like Vasher a lot. I don't think I'm going to make it to Landon Akers on the 4-game slate, but I do think he's pretty intriguing for the 2-game slate just because he's like objectively overpriced.
Right.
So, if he gets into the end zone a couple times and he's like, I don't know, 4 or 5% owned on the 2-game slate, like I think that's going to be a killer play. So I like that a decent bit. And then Fred Brown is fine. Alizé Mack, I guess, is okay. I don't think I'll get there on the 4-game slate. But yeah, he's fine for Showdown. Running back here, Jacques Patrick is a Brian Hill tier bell cow. This guy, let's see. He was third in weighted opportunity, 79% snap share last week, 67% route share, led all running backs in both of those metrics, 15 rushes and 4 targets. And John Hillman will work in for some red zone work, but it's really hard to dislike Patrick this week, especially because the Vegas run defense is objectively the worst in the XFL, giving up the most rushing yards per game, the most yards per carry, and their PFF's lowest graded run defense. Chris, I feel like I'm going to have a really hard time getting off Patrick to pay up for some of these more expensive running backs. I mean, he's the top play of the slate, right? At least at running back.
Yeah, he is. And it's I'm struggling with it because, playing a 40+% owned running back for the San Antonio Brahmas does not sound awesome. And we just talked about how you can play Benkert and Vasher and Brown and kind of you'll just get so much leverage on Jacques Patrick teams. And it's a tough spot. Like, he's hard to fade because he's going to get the work, and Vegas's defense has been bad. I'll probably just try to structure my lineups about half and half with some of them that have Patrick and other ones that just have a ton of leverage if Patrick fails in the passing game is what goes off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat. It's just he's so hard to get
Yep.
off of, and generally, like in a lot of matchups, I would make the counter argument that like, oh well, he could be super inefficient against Vegas, though. I mean, really hard to argue that
Yes.
they're a really bad defense. They're giving up the second most points per game, ahead of only Orlando, and they're a really bad run defense. Teams have just been running all over them. So I kind of think Jacques Patrick is just the what is he? He's like the $5,700 version of Brian Hill. So in this matchup, in this specific spot, answering Neil's question, we do not have our projections in CSV format on the site, but you can copy and paste. That is something we're working on. Something I've requested internally. So sorry about that, Neil, but I promise copying pasting works almost as well. So yeah, Chris, anything else on this San Antonio running back spot? John Hillman for Showdown. I mean, he's probably got some TD equity, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe we saw Patrick get, when he was the backup, get up to a decent share. Maybe they
Yeah.
work in Hillman a little bit more for Showdown. I think that totally makes sense.
Yeah, it does seem like they really want Patrick to be the bell cow, at least after the usage that we saw last week. So going to be hard to get away from him. I'm kind of with you, like probably 50% or so. And on the teams where you don't play Patrick, it probably makes sense to work in some of these San
Yeah,
Antonio
have
pass
some
catchers.
other San Antonio cheap
Yeah.
one. They don't have to do a lot to not kill. Like if Vasher has 9 points, you'll be okay.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, nine points for Vasher, I think is pretty reasonable. Like he could go for 20. They seem to really like him deep and really like him in the end zone. I think he's a very strong play this week. Vegas side of things, I wrote up a great Brett Huntley blurb that I had to just throw in the trash because the team announced that Jalen McLendon is their starting quarterback. We don't trust these Vegas depth charts. They had McLendon listed as QB1 on the depth chart, and we were just like, whatever, we're ignoring that. They tweeted QB1 with a picture of Jalen McLendon.
Yeah.
Like, this is not up for debate. He is starting this week. 137 career college pass attempts. He mostly served as a backup in college. 14 career attempts in the preseason or in the 2020 XFL. There were a couple. He played for the LA Wildcats. There were a couple spots where Josh Johnson got hurt, and he filled in there. I think there's a very high chance that McLendon is really bad. Maybe he's good. There's also that possibility. Maybe he's good and he plays the entire game. I mean, he's the minimum price. I definitely prefer Benkert. And I think that there's a very, very high probability that we see Brett Hundley in this game, perhaps early on. Chris, how are you playing this Vegas quarterback situation?
I just like, what did Brett Hundley do to this Vegas coaching? They
Exactly.
do not want him to be their quarterback. Yet he's still the highest paid player in the whole XFL. Like I don't get it. How much of the game did Perez play last week? What, like 3 quarters, maybe mid third quarter, something? I forget.
Yeah, I believe around there. He got at least the whole first half.
Yeah, he got at least the first half. So yeah, I mean, they clearly don't want Hundley to be their guy. Is there
Which is
any
insane.
chance London is a good play if he gets the whole game? Like, is he worth throwing in a couple lineups for that outcome? Because I mean, he's 6K just like Benkert is.
Yeah, that's the thing. And like they have solid wide receivers. Like in my McLendon write up, I noted that we've only seen Vegas quarterbacks play 3 full games and they're averaging like 23
Yeah, Perez
DraftKings
has
points
had
per
good
game.
games. Hundley's had
Yeah.
good games.
Yeah. So I mean, there is like this offense clearly has some juice. But I mean the benching risk is so high here and he might just be really bad. So that's like, I mean, that's a serious concern. I'm probably making like 30 or 35 teams. I guess I'll have 1 or 2 McLendon just in case. I really don't feel good about it though. Like,
Do you think ownership wise, one of the cheap guys is way different than the other? Or you think they come in about the same?
I would assume Benkert's going to be the most popular. Like, I think Benkert probably around 10 to 12%, and McLendon maybe around 5-ish.
Yeah. So there's not a
Um,
huge leverage spot there either, really. Yep.
yeah, I don't think so. I think, industry wide, it looks like people are projecting like an 80-20 split for McLendon. I think it's probably like the true split is probably closer to 50-50. That's about what we have. We've got like 60-40 right now. Um, Man, it is just really tough. And like I bet the under in this game. I think the only way the under misses is if Hunley comes in early and lights up the scoreboard, which is
Yeah.
definitely possible. So yeah, I think we spent enough time on this Vegas quarterback situation. Vegas wide receivers are a little interesting. I mean, things are really up in the air with these guys after Jeff Badette because we just don't know who's going to be active. I wouldn't be surprised if Martavis Bryant um, missed after coming down with that illness. I expect Allison and Sweeting to play. It was interesting last week. Brian and Allison were both active. First time that happened under the new OC, and they both played, earned roughly full-time route shares. Sinque Sweeting's route share fell to like 40%, something like that, after about 70% in week 5.
Yeah. 42%.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm
there's
having
definitely a top 3. It's just the injuries make it tricky.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Badette's like certainly interesting if you assume they get some decent QB play here, because I think he probably goes pretty under-owned. I think industry wide, we're kind of projecting Vegas has a dip in passing efficiency because of this new quarterback. So that'll bring down all these Vegas wide receivers a bit. Doesn't make Badette as tempting of a play as he normally is, but I mean, we know he's got the speed, he's got the juice for these big plays. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do with these Vegas wide receivers. Do you have a lean, Chris?
No, I'll be looking at inactives to kind of make that
Yeah.
call. But Badette, if I do decide to play any McLendon, then maybe I'll play some Badette. It'll be tough to play him as a one-off though.
Yeah. I'm with you. I mean, I feel like the best argument for Badette is that, his ownership will be low and, we know he can rip off big plays. But I'm definitely concerned about this passing game. I think inactives is huge. If we just assume, everyone is healthy and everyone is active, I don't really love anyone, but that would certainly be my favorite. I do think Allison is a little interesting. It's felt like the last couple weeks they've wanted him a little more involved after he was a healthy scratch in week 4, I believe. Man, it feels pretty thin, at least on the 4-game slate.
Yep.
So running back here, John Lovett had a pretty solid game last week, saw pretty good usage. At the same time, that was also perfect game script for him. I mean, he's more of the pass catching guy, and Vegas just getting their doors blown off by St. Louis, I think really helped him. Do you have a lean on these running backs? Because we have them pretty close to even. Both guys projected around 9 points right now.
Yeah, Lovett looks good in the passing game.
For sure.
His price is much better at 4,900 than Rod Smith's 6,700. Maybe I mix in a little bit of Lovett, but I think there's better options for really either running back elsewhere, whether it's getting way down at Letty Brown or Patrick or spending up for one of the more expensive guys.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to end up on either of these guys on the 4-game slate. On the 2-game slate, though, I like both. I think Lovett especially makes a lot of sense in lineups that anticipate, San Antonio doing pretty well.
Yep.
But yeah, it feels pretty thin for the 4-game slate. I mean, I don't know, 4,900, like you can play Lovett on the 4-game slate. Like I don't think that's egregious by any means. Anything else on Vegas before we move on?
Nope, we're good.
Sweet. All right. Our second Saturday game kicks off at 6 p.m. It is the DC Defenders at the Orlando Guardians. Total here is 45.5. DC favored by 10. Chris, are there any bets you like on this game?
I think Orlando's being a little bit underrated again. DC being favored at 10. Dormady is just definitely an upgrade of what they've had at QB the rest of the season, and I think there's a good chance. I know DC has been awesome, but I think they can get within that 10-point range.
Yeah, I'm with you. 10 feels like a bit much. One mistake that I've seen like sportsbooks making pretty consistently with XFL stuff is just not making any adjustments for quarterback changes. Orlando is a better offense with Dormady. They're no longer the worst offense in the league. They're, probably league average with Dormady at QB. So they're probably a little underrated. I get that it's super gross to take Orlando and the points, but I would consider it. Not something I've bet personally yet, but I'm thinking about it a little bit. Injuries here. Lance Lenore placed on IR. I have no idea what happened. I don't know if he got hurt in pregame warmups or if it was in practice and they just didn't report it. But yeah, 0 snaps last week. Very strange situation. Dan Williams has just straight up taken over his role. On the DC side of things, Jaquez Izzard is out due to a hamstring injury. He wasn't really playing a ton, so at least on offense, that's not a huge deal. KJ Sales expected to take over punt returning duties for my punt return enjoyers out there. Ethan Wolf dealing with an ankle issue. Raquel Armstead dealing with a calf issue. Both listed as questionable, both expected to play. So not a ton to worry about on this game. On the DC side, feels like Jordan Ta'amu is going to be pretty popular. I had a tweet. De'Aaron King in weeks 1 through 4 was playing about 19 snaps per game. These last 2 weeks, only 6 snaps per game. Feels like the coaches are a lot more comfortable with Ta'amu, basically being the full-time quarterback. I mean, King will still have a package, but it doesn't seem like they want to rotate him in as much, which is obviously good for Ta'amu's value. How are you treating Ta'amu this week, given that he will probably be fairly popular? I mean, he's projecting well industry-wide, projects pretty decent for us.
Yeah, it feels like people are really starting to believe in this DC offense with him, Abram Smith, and Lucky Jackson all projecting pretty well.
Yep.
It makes it not as exciting though, really, because we've seen Ta'amu not play well, and we've seen it for not just this season, in previous spring football seasons.
Yep.
Does kind of make me not want to play a ton of them, just because I think there's just other ways for you to be different, and just hope the DC side just doesn't go crazy, which they run the ball so much that that's very possible. That's very much in the range of outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. 8,500 for Ta'amu is obviously nice, but I mean, he is so streaky. I've seen like some of the worst quarterbacking I've seen in spring football has come from Ta'amu, and at the same time, there are also games where he looks really good as both a runner and a passer. So I get it. If you want to, I mean, you'll probably be 15, 20%. If you want to indulge that ownership, I'm fine with it. I'll play a bit. I will probably come in underweight though, because I mean, the chance that Ta'amu just has like a total dud performance is definitely pretty real. On the wide receiver side of things, we saw Lucky Jackson with, I think, what amounted to the best fantasy performance by a wide receiver of the season. It's like 136 yards on only, 5 catches. And he had a score in there too. I think ended up with 27, 28 DraftKings points. Chris, I know you've been pounding the table for Lucky Jackson a lot these past few weeks. Priced up to 6,200 though, and he'll probably be fairly popular. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd expect, at least 20% ownership here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could be even higher just because that range is not super. I mean, there's a couple guys in that, $5,000 to $6,000 range, but there's not a ton of guys. I've thought Lucky Jackson had a big game coming for him. Eventually, he was getting designed looks. He just wasn't getting. Guys like Josh Hammond and whatnot were just getting a lot of the red zone work, and it finally went Lucky Jackson's way. And if he's going to be popular, then I'm probably just not going to play him this week. I think you can get different with Hammond or Blair, or just fading the passing attack for the DC side altogether. I mean, it's just why it doesn't feel right to lean into one of the lowest passing offenses in the league, even if we do expect them to put up a lot of points, that the touchdowns you could just go to any of the other guys on the team.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's really tough to like a very popular Lucky Jackson. I mean, in his previous 5 games, 8.9 DraftKings fantasy points per game, 5.6 targets per game. Those numbers rank 14th and 16th among wide receivers over the full season. DC throwing the ball just 38% of the time in the red zone and dropping back 23 times per game, which is 23% less than the team in 7th place. I mean, they're not throwing at all. Volume super low. I mean, I've been with you. Like, I think Lucky Jackson is the team's best wide receiver. And I wasn't, shocked that he had a huge game, but I do not want to chase ownership on him. I honestly, if I think he's going to be 20%, which I kind of do based on the way he's projecting and things are looking. I honestly might just X him out of my player pool.
Yep.
Chris Blair, I think, is a little interesting. He's looked better to me than Josh Hammond has. We have them projected for about the same, and Blair's only 4,700. Do you have a big lean there?
Yeah, he definitely gets some deep shots. I think I prefer him to Hammond. Hammond does seem to get a good amount of the red zone work for whatever reason. But yeah, I would lean Blair.
Yeah, they really like those screens to Hammond especially. I mean, I'm not super anxious to play these passing game weapons because, like I said, 23 dropbacks per game, not great. The running back discussion is a little interesting. We know Abram Smith is like the guy. He's going to play about 70% of the snaps and earn, about at least 65% of the backfield opportunities here and get, probably 70% of the red zone work, which is obviously great for a team that has the highest implied team total of the season at 28 points and, who runs the ball at just a ridiculously high rate. What did surprise me a little bit last week, though, I thought Abram Smith would hold on to more of his week 5 role, even with Raquel Armstead back, just given how well he played. That wasn't really the case. Armstead with 7 weighted opportunity points, 28% snap share, 9 total opportunities, and 2 red zone rushes. I don't think he's in play for the 4-game slate, but I actually kind of like Raquel Armstead a good bit for this Saturday 2-game slate. Chris, any takes on this backfield?
I think you basically hit it right on the nail on the head. I mean, Armstead definitely did get worked back in a good amount, kind of what we saw a little earlier in the season. And I mean, Abram Smith's been awesome, but if the team doesn't want to lean that way, he's on the 2-game slate. I think you're right. Armstead becomes viable. On the 4-game slate, probably not playing Armstead, but I think it does make Abram Smith even a little tricky on the 4-game slate, just given how expensive he is. Orlando's defense, I'd say, has played a little bit better, but they're definitely still not one of the best defenses in the league. So there's a chance that DC does get up like the Vegas line says, and they're able to run the ball just like they always do. And it mostly goes to Abram Smith. But yeah, Abram Smith, while projecting well, is definitely not one of my favorite running back plays this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think his ownership could, we've seen a lot of these weeks, Abram Smith's ownership has come in surprisingly low because I think people generally have preferred Brian Hill. And, this week, especially, we have Jacques Patrick, who just really stands out. And I mean, Letty Brown also we talked about as a solid salary saving option. I think you could argue that Abram Smith is going to be super popular, but my gut kind of tells me that I think he goes, maybe closer to 15 or 20% owned because he is so expensive. I don't have a ton of conviction on that. I wouldn't be surprised if he pushed for 35%. But I am a little interested in him if I think he comes in under owned, which my gut kind of tells me, I think yes, because it just doesn't feel like the sexiest spot given the salary. Do you have a take on ownership here?
Yeah, if he comes in lower, which I don't know, I was playing around with building some lineup. It's not too hard to fit his salary in with even with some of the more expensive QBs.
Yeah.
So he's definitely going to be north of 20%. And
Okay.
it just kind of, I just think it depends from there how much higher he gets. If he gets, 35 to 40, then it's like, I don't know. 20 I'd be fine with though, or, low 20s. I think he's a fine play.
Yeah, one of the rules I'm definitely going to set this week is I don't want Abram Smith in any Jordan Ta'amu lineups. I mean, Ta'amu targets running backs at like an 8% rate. The correlation there is super, super negative. I mean, you're kind of just banking on one of these guys getting the TDs, or I mean, all the TDs could go to Derek King, and both guys failed. So which would probably be great for my Derek King lineups of weeks past that are dead in the water thanks to his 5-point DK performances. But yeah, I do think running back here is pretty interesting, especially from an ownership perspective. You have anything else on this game before we move on here? Or actually, no, we need to get to the Orlando side of things. I almost totally skipped them. Quinn Dormady looked has looked pretty good the last 2 weeks. I mean, week 6, he was overthrowing guys left and right, still finished with 14 DraftKings points, almost had a goal line touchdown. His
Yeah,
rushing has
taken back.
been
Yeah.
like surprisingly good. Yeah, I think he had 44 rushing yards last week. I mean, I don't think he's like some great athlete or whatever, but he's super willing to run, and they're giving him, some of these goal line read options, and he seems willing to keep it. I have a really hard time not liking Dormady, especially given we expect Orlando to play from behind. What's your take on Dormady, and who do you think are his best stacking partners?
Yeah, I really like Dormady this week. He'll probably be my highest owned QB. DC has given up points to basically everybody they've played, which is just so opposite what we normally see in football, that a team that runs so heavy also giving up so many points and then scoring so many points. Yeah, so I really like Dormady. Charleston Rambo, I think, has quietly really come on. He was a guy earlier in the season that seemed like he was out there doing cardio. He's running all the routes and just getting no targets. But it's really picked up these past few weeks. He had, what did he have? He had 25% of the targets last week, and that was with Lenore being ruled out. We don't know when that Lenore injury happened, so maybe this week with an extra week of planning, they don't just force feed Rambo. They've got other looks for Dan Williams or whoever else. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can. I don't think because of Rambo's inefficiency earlier in the season, he's not going to be popular. I like stacking him with Rambo. You can do it with Latimer as always, but Latimer is probably going to be the favorite stacking partner.
Oh yeah.
And then and then Dan Williams at 3K for sure you can play him with.
Yeah, everyone seems to really love Latimer, and I mean it's for good reason. He has the best touchdown equity on the team, I think, even including these running backs. And yeah, he's leading the team in targets, all that. Charleston Rambo, I actually wrote him up. I think I like Rambo a lot. People aren't going to get there because he's a little expensive, which is understandable, but he led all players last week in targets, finished 3rd in air yards. I mean, if Dormady connected on any one of those deep balls that he threw him, Rambo probably finishes last week with like 20, maybe 25 DraftKings points. So I like Rambo a lot. Dan Williams is pretty clearly the top value at wide receiver. Like I said, I mean, he took over what we expected to be the Lance Lenore role. Basically running every route and, earning somewhere in the realm of, 20% target share. Pretty solid at 3K now that we know Orlando has some competency at the quarterback position. And then, I mean, you can't forget about Eli Rogers at 3,600, who's also out there a good amount. And, is talented enough to have a big game. We haven't really seen it yet. But I think Orlando is a pretty fun team to build lineups around because you have the solid, more expensive options in Latimer and Rambo. And then you have some very clear salary saving guys in Rogers and Dan Williams. So really like all those plays, like all the combination of Dormady lineups. I think you're mostly single stacking him. I'm not sure he has the juice for doubles. But I mean, Dormady plus the 2 cheap wide receivers, Rogers and Williams, I think
they're cheap
is
enough
probably
to pay
fine.
off.
And then you just load up on the expensive guys elsewhere. Running back here, I could not believe that 1.3% of the field ended up on Devin Darrington last week. It didn't make any sense to me. And he had like 22 DraftKings points, ripped off a ton of long runs. To be fair, Darrington is clearly the best running back in this Orlando backfield. I think he's at like 5.6 yards per carry, and Jermaine Martin's like 3.9. So he's lapping Martin in terms of efficiency, and like just from the eye test, he looks a lot better. The problem though is that Darrington only had a 30% snap share and an 8% route share last week, 5.7 weighted opportunity points. I mean, he basically 4x'd his expectation, which is just insane. I wouldn't be shocked if the team says, hey, you're clearly really good, we're going to give you a lot more work. At the same time, though, I'm not banking on that. No. And I have a really hard time getting to Darrington, just given his underlying usage numbers.
I don't think you can trust the team. They've gone back and forth between these guys multiple times. It just makes it too hard on the 4-game slate.
He's only 4,800, but for 900 more, you can just play Jacques Patrick. So it's really tough. I'm sure his ownership will once again surprise me. I don't think I can justify it. At least not on the The
Not
4
on the
game
4
slate.
game slate.
On the 2 game slate, I do think he's
Yeah,
a
2
genuine
game
game
or
play.
Showdown is take your shots.
Yeah.
You know, that's totally fine, but it's too hard. You need the ceiling outcome again. And maybe not quite that ceiling outcome, but you need a big outcome again.
Yeah. I mean, like just based on weighted opportunity, like you are not getting great value here based on these underlying usage metrics. So greatly prefer the passing game. But at the same time, like I said, Darlington's pretty dang good. All right. Any final thoughts on this game now that we have actually covered both teams?
Yes, we're good. We're good here.
All right. Sounds good. Our final game of the week, what I would consider pretty clearly the best game of the week, kicks off Sunday at 2 p.m. It's the St. Louis Battlehawks at the Houston Roughnecks. Houston favored by 3 points. Total here 44.5. Chris, any bets that you like?
I actually don't have a lean for this game. I think Vegas pretty much nailed the line right on the head with the over under and the spread.
Yeah, I also don't have a lean. I thought this was a pretty accurate line. Injuries. Marcel Aitman is back. He full practiced on Thursday and is expected to play, but he's listed as the backup to Darius Shepard. So maybe don't anticipate him regaining his week 1 role, at least immediately. Another important note with him is that he's not in the player pool, at least for the 4 game slate. I should double check Showdown, but I don't think you can play Aitman this week. So it's really just keeping an eye on him for the purposes of rotations. Obviously, if he's inactive, that's a pretty big boost for Darius Shepard. We can talk about that here in a second. Starting on the St. Louis side, AJ McCarron, we kind of say the same thing about him every week. He's a solid play. He's probably the best quarterback in the XFL. I think, that's a decently safe statement at this point. And he's leading XFL quarterbacks in fantasy points per game. It's not super sexy. I mean, we know ownership will be 15 to 20% here. He'll be one of the higher owned quarterbacks of the slate. Stacking him is a little tougher than normal because Aitman is expected back. How are you playing the St. Louis Battlehawks passing game?
I actually like McCarron this week.
Okay.
I think he's better than a fine play. I think you can make his pretty high salary work with some of the cheaper options. There's a good chance that this game just easily has the highest points scored over all the other games. So Butler is probably safe to stack him no matter what Aitman. I don't think Butler's role really changes.
Yeah.
You are eating up a lot of salary to do that though.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means people aren't going to probably do it as much as they might. Butler might be a popular one-off, but he might not be stacked with McCarron that often. Darius Shepard, I want to believe that whether Aitman is back or not, will still have a good role. He seems like he's actually a good receiver.
Yeah.
It does make it tough though. I'll have to play with the lineups a little bit more to see what other kind of players you can get in versus stacking him with Shepard or Butler. And I'm probably not really stacking him with anybody else. Maybe a little bit of Prohl, but definitely not like you said, Aitman's not in the player pool. Mitchell becomes unplayable. I think if you can get Brian Hill in there, stacking them together is fine too. Hill just has enough of the overall workload that, putting him and McCarron in the same lineup is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think, if you anticipate St. Louis scoring a ton of points, Hill gets enough receiving work and, has enough TD equity. You're just kind of banking on capturing all the touchdowns there. If you play Hill and McCarron, and I'm with you. I think that Butler take is pretty strong. He will be a popular one-off. I mean, his ownership kind of surprised me last week, 50% in the $15, 57% in the 222. But I think with McCarron, he probably goes a little under-owned. I mean, McCarron won't be crazy popular, and yeah, it is kind of tough to fit both those guys in. I'm still interested in Darius Shepard. I mean, like you said, he looks legit good. And I mean, he was playing a good amount when Aitman was active. It was just like the targets weren't coming. And it seems like his target share really exploded after Aitman went down. So that would be the main thing I'd want to keep an eye on there. At the same time, though, I'm not expecting a huge role for Aitman coming back from injury, especially given his status on the depth chart. Austin Prohl, I suppose, is still in play at $7K, though. I mean, that's pretty expensive. It's hard to get there. Yeah, I guess, I mean, we've already touched on Brian Hill a little bit. In the battle of expensive running backs, Brian Hill versus Abram Smith, do you have a significant lean there? I think we have Abram Smith projected a little better right now.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I want to believe. I probably prefer Brian Hill, but it's really close. I don't think I have a strong lean over one or the other.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I give a very slight preference to Hill, but it is very close. I mean, it would not be hard to argue for Abram Smith. I mean, Brian Hill, we know, like league's premier bell cow. He's 70% snap share, 60+% of the routes, the vast majority of the red zone work. It was, for showdown purposes, it was interesting to see Kareem Walker play over Mateo Durant last week. Mateo Durant seems to be kind of demoted to that RB3 role, at least if you're basing this off of last week's usage. So I haven't checked showdown prices, but if Kareem Walker is like 1,000, he's probably worth a flyer.
Yep, could fall in the end zone.
Maybe he steals a touchdown.
They do bring him in for goal line works very frustratingly over Brian Hill sometimes.
Yeah, Brian Hill does not have the monopoly over the goal line work, which is pretty frustrating. But I mean, he's good. His role is really good. Not a whole lot of smack you can talk about Brian Hill. The Houston side of things, I mean, quarterback, I was middle of the week. I was getting really excited for Cole McDonald potentially starting. Team put out their depth chart. Brandon Silver is still listed as QB1, which makes this a very tricky situation. I think we have a pretty even split projected right now. I mean, it really feels like Silvers is on like super thin ice. If he throws an interception on one of these first couple drives, like we probably see McDonald play the rest of the game. Do you think you can justify Cole McDonald on the 4-game slate as like a 1% owned, hopefully Silvers gets benched kind of play? Because I'm honestly thinking about it.
Yeah, I've thought about it, and yeah, I don't know how his price is 8,400. Like it's just going to make it. He really needs to come in quick if that's what his price is going to be. But on the flip side, he had 17.6 yards per pass attempt last week and 12.2 ADOT. So he goes for it, so he can put up the points quick. And I wonder. I've thought Silvers looked pretty questionable the past 2 weeks when the Houston offense has struggled a little bit. I don't think it's really the offense. I think what they're trying to do makes sense. Just Silvers just seems to be missing guys.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in practice they see with McDonald that they're a little worried about making him the full-time starter. But yeah, Silvers is definitely on thin ice. And yeah, if they get behind in this game at all, I imagine McDonald comes in very quickly.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I think I am going to play a couple McDonald lineups because you're just going to get such great leverage if Silvers gets benched immediately. And I mean, I guess there is, an off chance that McDonald just outright starts and the team was just, fooling around on their depth chart. McDonald, I think if he was confirmed the starter, it would probably be maybe easily the best fantasy quarterback in the XFL. I mean, the passing volume is amazing and he really wants to run and he loves to chuck it deep. I mean, just like everything about this guy is perfect for fantasy. Like some armchair scouting last week, I did think he plays kind of wild. Like he plays a little more out of control than Silvers does. So that I think that might be why the coaches lean more into Silvers.
Right.
But
it could be, they're down. They might say, what do we have to lose? Like if McDonald throws another pick, it's not like, we were already losing anyway. And maybe they view Silvers as a guy that can keep them in games and the guy they can win with. But McDonald is the high upside boom bust play for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the other thing about McDonald is like if he is the starter or Silvers gets benched and he's playing well, like he's going to get every single snap. And that's what's killed Silvers in fantasy is that McDonald will come in for these goal line plays or these like third and shorts and steal a couple snaps. So McDonald is definitely tempting for the 4-game slate. For Showdown, I think he's an excellent play. And honestly, I think for Showdown, you can probably like make some reasonable lineups with like both of these guys in the flex. I don't think you have to commit to just one, although that's probably what I'll do on most of my teams.
Yeah, it might be. The only issue with doing it on Showdown is that McDonald, I haven't looked at pricing, but I'm assuming McDonald is not super cheap. So you'd be tying up a lot of salary, especially that means you're probably not playing like McCarron or Butler or some of these other higher price guys.
Yeah, that does make it a little tricky. Houston wide receivers, I think this is like a really interesting spot this week. I mean, we know Deontay Burnett, he's the expensive guy. He's the guy everyone has projected for the most points. Nice blow up game last week. Looks pretty good. We know he's talented. Beyond him, though, I think the discussion is pretty interesting. Cedric Byrd projects well, and I anticipate Cedric Byrd being fairly popular. Justin Smith was kind of a dud last week, but he did run every route, which is nice. We might see some Jakari Roberson this week. Chris, for 4-game slate, which one of these guys do you like?
And I think this is the nut outcome for your Justin Smith love. I mean, he goes off when Kirkland gets hurt. Everybody wants to play him last week. He doesn't, he has great peripheral numbers, runs all the routes, 18% target share. And now no one's going to really want to play him again. I mean, he seems like clearly the best play here. Bird definitely saw an uptick, but if you're telling me that I can play Justin Smith at a way lower ownership, seems like an awesome play.
Yeah, if Justin Smith is going to be half the ownership of Cedric Byrd, I mean, it's hard not to love it. I wrapped up my Justin Smith blurb by just saying this won't surprise longtime readers, but Justin Smith is once again one of my favorite wide receiver plays in GPPs. I mean, it just feels like a really great, like the perfect bounce back spot. We've seen, in XFL, in NFL, I don't think we'd see a drastic dip in ownership from a dud game from a guy like Justin Smith. In XFL, though, people will be scared away, which is fantastic. For tournaments. So I like Justin Smith a lot. I actually presented a pretty bearish case in my article for Cedric Byrd. I mean, the volume's great. I think 8 targets per game over his last 3 games, which is like really nice, but his 8.6, and he just doesn't have much of a red zone role. I also think that the slot, route shares are still like fairly in flux for Houston. It doesn't seem like any one guy has emerged as, the top option. Obviously, Travell Harris and Cedric Byrd are the guys who are running most of the routes, but even this season, like they've collectively averaged a 56% route share. So, I wouldn't be shocked if Cedric Byrd only ran half the routes, which could be an issue, especially if the team decides that they like Jakari Roberson. I mean, Ben Putman caught a long, I think what looked like a touchdown. I believe Neil Orfield tweeted about that. And then they didn't bother reviewing it and ran some plays from the 1-yard line, which was certainly frustrating for Ben Putman people. Do you have any additional takes on these slot wide receivers? Because outside, I mean, it feels pretty clear here.
Yeah, Harris does get a good amount of the red zone work. He's just more expensive than Byrd and Justin Smith, so it's just like tough to get to him. I'll be using mostly Justin Smith, probably a little bit of Burnett, and while Byrd does project awesome, I'll probably try to stay away with him if I can.
Yeah, Bird's more of a fade to me. I think if you're really going extreme galaxy brain stuff, Jakari Roberson at 3K could be a little interesting. I mean, he might be really good. Like his college grades and stuff were excellent. And at least in terms of like a slot receiver, he has like everything you'd look for. So I don't anticipate a huge role for him this week. I mean, we've only got him projected for like a 5% target share, but the team might really like him. And like I said, he might be really good. So probably more of a note for Showdown. Going to be tough to get there on the 4-gamer. But I do have some interest there. Running back for Houston, kind of the same old here. We know Max Borghi is the lead back. He's going to get most of the red zone work. The problem though, is that he's not, I mean, we'd love to see the 90% Christian McCaffrey snap share, but every week it's, 50, 55%. The route share is fine. He gets good usage when he's on the field, but he's just not playing a ton. It feels really hard to get there. I mean, he's sitting at, what is he, 8,900? It feels really hard to get there when you have Brian Hill and Abram Smith, pretty similarly priced. How do you feel about Borghi as a play?
I don't know if Houston has just been one of the last games every week on the slate, but he's constantly the guy. And when I'm going to make late swaps, if I'm in a lineup that I'm behind, I'm always putting in Borghi because he's never popular. He's always a little too expensive.
Yeah.
But he tends to have decent game. Like he's on a good offense and gets pretty much all the red zone work. He just doesn't play all the snaps for whatever reason. So I think it's perfect that he is again on the last game, and you can kind of just see what shape your lineups are in. If you're in good shape, you play Brian Hill or Abram Smith if you have enough salary, and if you need a low ownership option that goes off, then switch it to Borgie. I think that's probably what I'll do again.
Yeah, I really love that the three like high price running backs are playing in the last two games. It'll give you just a ton of flexibility for late swap stuff. And, like Chris said, Borgie is a really great swap option because, I mean, he's going to be like 5%. He's just really hard to get to. These sort of ancillary guys. I think Dejon Lee is kind of toast. He's just barely playing. Bryson Aline though is still getting like decent usage in the passing game, and he looks pretty explosive. I'd imagine you have some interest there in Showdown.
Yeah, Showdown's fine, and he's way too expensive for the four
Yeah.
game slate.
Yeah, I don't think
5,500. Yeah,
you can't get there on the 4-game slate. Maybe the Devin Darrington people from last week will have some interest in way too expensive Aline on the 4-gamer. Justin Freeman in the chat asking, are we worried AJ Smith has lost his fastball? I think that's an interesting question after the Houston offense came out pretty slow these last 2 weeks. At the same time, though, both of these last two games, they finished pretty strong. So it does seem like AJ Smith was able to adjust in some capacity. Chris, how are you handling the Roughnecks offense looking a little more iffy these last couple of weeks?
Yeah, there might be some stuff that teams have figured out a little bit with them, but I think it's mostly been Silvers. Even when they were really cruising early in the season, Silvers seemed like he was leaving plays on the table and whatnot a little bit. It just didn't matter because the rest of the offense was just humming. I don't know if McDonald is necessarily the answer, but I'm not worried about the offense and the way they run it as much as I think Silvers may be reaching his ceiling a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That was sort of my general take. And I think that kind of leads us nicely into our final segment here, which we're going to mix it up with a championship odds discussion. So actually, most of the sports books either didn't list championship odds or took them down this week. FanDuel did list them, and I believe still has them up. Right now, we've got the DC Defenders as the heavy favorite. Shouldn't surprise anyone. Plus 120 for the championship. Then Houston, plus 220. St. Louis, plus 600. Seattle, plus 650. For those who are unaware, the playoff format is that the top two teams in each division make the playoffs. So the divisions are the North, which is basically Seattle, St. Louis, DC, and who's that fourth team that's not in Texas?
Vipers.
Yes, Vegas. So basically a 3-horse race in the North between Seattle, St. Louis, and DC. DC, we're probably safely assuming they have a playoff spot locked up. So it's really just St. Louis and Seattle competing with each other. Again, St. Louis plus 600 to win the championship, Seattle plus 650. Chris, do you have any leans on, that side of the league?
I definitely would not be betting the DC, not just with them being the favorite. It feels like they're being priced at basically the ceiling outcome. I don't hate taking shots on St. Louis or Seattle, really. I think both. I'd probably lean St. Louis because I think McCarron is better than DiNucci a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I would go on that side.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a shot on Seattle. I mean, they're what, 2 plays away from being 6-0. I mean, they'd probably be plus 150 if that was the case. The problem though is, like we said earlier, they just every single game they play is close somehow. I mean, they just don't. St. Louis has looked dominant at times. Seattle just hasn't. Like they make every game close. So I do think I'm kind of with you. I'd lean St. Louis there, even though my heart kind of says Seattle at plus 650. In the South, so the South is all the Texas teams plus Orlando. We know Houston is making the playoffs. Like that's not up for debate. They're going to be a heavy favorite against whoever they play, whether it's Arlington or San Antonio. I think we can probably safely assume Orlando is eliminated at this point, barring a miracle run and a bunch of losses from Arlington and San Antonio. How do you feel about Houston at plus 220? To me, that feels about right. I was kind of hoping bookmakers would punish them a little more for their loss against DC.
Yeah, I think that's a solid bet. I don't because they're definitely making the playoffs, and then what would they be favorites in the first game of the playoffs? Minus -6.5, -5, pretty much regardless
Yeah,
of any of
I mean
these
the money
teams.
line there would probably be -300,
Right.
-250.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, I think you're getting, and if they're in the championship, so then they'd be at best plus 120-ish, something like
mhm.
that. So yeah, getting plus 220 now seems like a pretty decent bet if you want to bet it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, both Seattle and St. Louis have a decent shot at beating DC. Obviously, if Houston played DC today, they would be dogs, but I think they'd pretty safely be favored against St. Louis or Seattle. So I do think the pricing on them is pretty appropriate, but I really don't hate it as a bet because you're locking in a team that's almost certainly going to be in the championship. I got a bunch of Houston at 6-1, and then I got a little bit more at 3.5-1. So I've got a pretty big rooting interest there, as those who see my hat can probably tell. That said, one of Arlington or San Antonio has to make the playoffs based on the way this is set up. Do you have a lean here? Because it feels like, obviously San Antonio has Benkert now, Arlington has Perez. Maybe one of these teams could come alive in the second half of the season and actually put up a fight against Houston in the playoffs. Do you have a lean there?
So I actually just checked because when you said it, that you said Orlando was for sure probably knocked out, and I wanted to
Uh-huh.
see if Arlington or San Antonio played each other at all any of the rest of the season, and they
Uh-huh.
don't. So there is a world where Orlando makes the playoffs,
Okay.
and
All
at
right. Well, then we
plus,
can we can keep them in the discussion. I mean,
yeah, at plus 11,000, all they have to do is get past Arlington and San Antonio and just get very lucky against Houston and whoever makes it out of the other side. I mean, I don't feel good about betting on San Antonio or Arlington. Might as well get the really awesome long shot odds.
yeah, I mean, you bring that up, like I don't hate it. I think like there's definitely a world where, out of Perez, Benkert, and Quinn Dormady is the best quarterback. The problem with Orlando is like while their offense has improved, we know that defense isn't getting any better. So they're just going to be giving up 30 points per game the rest of the way. I at plus 11,000 though, like I'm kind of with you. I don't totally hate it. Um, between Arlington and San Antonio, I think my lean would be Arlington. Benkert, I think like the range of outcomes on him is pretty wide, which I mean maybe you could argue is makes it worthwhile to bet San Antonio, but we know what Perez is. We know Perez is going to be decent, and I feel Arlington's the kind of team that is okay enough all around that maybe they could luck their way into a championship appearance at 12-1. They'd be a heavy dog to St. Louis, Seattle, DC. But yeah, actually, I really don't hate your Orlando take. I mean, maybe they luck box it in and you turn $1 into
Yeah.
11 million or whatever they're offering
Yeah, they
you.
do play San Antonio and Arlington each in the
Ooh,
next 4 weeks. So that's two games right there. And then San Antonio has DC again, Arlington has Houston again.
okay.
I mean, it's not impossible.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, guys, when those spreads come out, there's a decent chance Orlando would be a dog against either Arlington or San Antonio, and I would totally take Orlando there. For those early bets. Anything else on championship odds before we get out of here?
No, I think we covered it.
Sweet, awesome. Well, this was a great show, guys. Slate kicks off at 7 p.m. tonight. I will be in Discord for the rest of the evening if you guys want to ask me any questions or just just discuss whatever in regards to XFL stuff. So I'll be around. But yeah, thank you so much for watching the Week 7 edition of the Fantasy Points XFL breakdown. Good luck this week, everyone, and I hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards.